Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into the kind of history they definitely didn't teach you in school. The weird kind. You're not about to hear about epic battles or legendary treaties. No, tonight's journey begins in a musty, old parliament chamber where men in itchy wool robes spent entire days debating the color of hats and the shape of chair legs. You think your office meetings are pointless? Friend, you've seen nothing yet. If you had to sit through what's coming, you'd need 3 cups of medieval coffee and a sheepskin cushion for the soul. You probably wouldn't survive, unless you were fueled entirely by sarcasm. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, what time is it where you are? Are you wrapped in a blanket, or still sitting in traffic pretending to listen to a podcast? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing, no, tiptoeing, through the creaky wooden halls of the English Parliament, sometime in the mid-1300s. The air smells faintly of ink, wax, and something you can only hope is old cheese. Everyone around you is whispering in nervous tones because today, oh yes, today is the big debate. Not about war, or famine, or royal taxes. No, it's about a hat. More specifically, whether or not Lord Wendelmeyer of North Cheekshire should be allowed to wear his turnip-shaped velvet hat inside the chamber. You heard that right. The hat. Glorious, fuzzy, and shaped exactly like a swollen root vegetable, has become a subject of heated controversy for weeks. Lord Wendelmeyer says it keeps his thoughts warm and ripe. His political rival, Lady Marjorie Thistlebrush, claims it causes moral disorientation and visual nausea in her peripheral vision. There have been whispered rumors that one unfortunate clerk briefly mistook the hat for a roasted dinner, tried to bite it, and nearly lost a tooth. And so a special parliamentary session was called. You settle into a bench as the heated debate begins. A scribe starts reading the formal motion to assess whether members of this honorable chamber may don headwear of suspicious shape or suggestive silhouette, herein referred to as vegetable millinery. Someone coughs. Lord Wendelmeyer, Cas, stands dramatically hat in hand. He waves it like a sacred relic. This hat, he declares, is a symbol of my agricultural loyalty. While others grow vain, I grow turnips, and I wear my truth on my head. From the back someone mutters, then wear a sack of manure and be done with it. A ripple of giggles. The Speaker of the House slams his ceremonial bell. Order! Order! Lest this chamber become a barnyard. You can't help but notice the Speaker himself is wearing a powdered wig that looks like it's halfway through becoming a beehive. The irony is thick, possibly also scented. Someone's definitely wearing clove oil too strongly. Lady Marjorie rises. Her voice is sharp enough to slice cheddar. This is not a barn, and we are not tubers. How can I concentrate on the economy of sheep if I am visually assaulted by root vegetables worn as hats? Another member stands to add that actually, the turnip hat improves attendance, because people want to come just to see what Lord Wendelmeyer will wear next. Some of them are even sketching it for their wives. A whole side conversation breaks out about whether sketching a nobleman's hat during session is technically parliamentary graffiti. This spirals naturally into an hour-long sidebar about whether the doodles count as public record. A junior archivist passes out at the thought. You shift in your seat. The bench groans. You're not sure if it's the wood or your patience. The debate wears on. Arguments get more theatrical. One member reads aloud a 12th century scroll on dress codes, which features the unforgettable line, "No hat shall obscure the heavens or insult the eyes of thy neighbor." Another counters with a quote from a folk song, "Better a man with a silly crown than a crown with a silly man." By the time they take their first official recess, 3 people have argued that the hat inspires agricultural pride. 2 have said it's a slippery slope to vegetable cosplay, and one elderly baron has simply fallen asleep in his chair, snoring like a blessed cow. You glance over, his mouth is open, a bit of drool hanging like morning dew on a daisy. A scribe gently pokes him with a feather pen, which only makes him grunt and say, "No more beetroot, mama." You start to think about how absurd this all is. And yet, isn't there something charming about it? Here are people who could be plotting wars, but instead they're arguing about millinery. There's something delightfully human in the way they cling to their distractions. You imagine how this would play out today. Some TikTok influencer in a lettuce hat causing a media storm. Not so different, really. By the end of the day, no decision has been reached. The motion is postponed for further philosophical reflection, which is parliamentary code for "we're too tired and hungry to care anymore." The last comment recorded by the clerk that day reads, "The hat remains, the dignity suffers, but the chamber persists." Some historians still debate whether this hat controversy was real or just exaggerated in the records for comedic effect. Others argue it reveals deeper truths about distraction politics and the human need for small, controllable squabbles amid larger chaos. One theory even suggests Lord Wendelmeier started the whole thing to avoid discussing a scandal involving sheep taxes. But you, sitting there in your imaginary gallery seat, don't need a theory. You just saw a man defend his right to wear a turnip on his head and win if only by exhaustion, and you can't help but smile. Because maybe, just maybe, history isn't always about kings and conquests. Sometimes it's just about who gets to wear the weirdest hat in the room. And yes, if you're wondering, Lord Wendelmeier did eventually show up with a radish hat the following month. But that's a story for another night. You haven't even had time to recover from the great turnip hat scandal of Parliament, and yet here you are, swept straight into another absurd corridor of history. This time, the year is 1854, and the location. The gloriously drafty halls of the British Parliament during Queen Victoria's prim and polished reign. The topic on the floor, one that, on paper, seems harmless, almost quaint. How long should a gentleman's scarf be to be considered appropriate for parliamentary conduct? You blink. You look around. No, you're not dreaming. The men are actually measuring their scarves. One fellow is dramatically unfurling, a tape measure like he's about to construct a railway, not attend a debate on tariffs. Let's set the scene. Picture it. A cold January morning. The Thames is wrapped in fog. The floor tiles of Westminster are slick with mud from every boot in London, and inside the chamber, tensions are heating up. Not about law or empire, but over what Lord Bartholomew, Higginbotham III, has decided to wrap around his neck. His scarf, pale green, trimmed with tassels and just shy of 1.5 meters long, is causing a ruckus. The Speaker has already sighed 5 times. Lord Pembroke muttered something about dressing like a continental poet, which was the 1850s version of a scathing insult. You're standing near a marble pillar, trying not to laugh. Lord Bartholomew, proud and ever so slightly smug, stands to defend himself. He flutters the end of his scarf like a magician with a silk handkerchief. It is not, I repeat, not a fashion accessory, he insists. It is an item of health. I refuse to sacrifice my trachea to the cold abyss that is this chamber's ventilation system. Gasps erupt. The word trachea was always a crowd stopper. Someone counters that if Lord Bartholomew's scarf is permitted, then surely next will be cloaks, then blankets, then perhaps even quilts, until this noble institution resembles a bedchamber and not a governing body. Another member chimes in, entirely too seriously. I would rather be wrapped in the Union Jack than in whatever that mint-colored insult is. A ripple of agreement echoes. Lord Cornwhistle, an elderly baron who hasn't stood in years unless a roast pheasant was involved, finally raises his voice. The scarf is excessive. I couldn't see the man's cravat beneath it, and without a cravat, how do we know he is trustworthy? That apparently is a real concern. You stifle a giggle behind your hand. Cravats, the lie detectors of the 19th century. Soon, the debate takes on the air of a children's squabble disguised in the language of the monarchy. One particularly energetic MP insists that the scarf was a length unbecoming of a British subject, citing an obscure dress code from 1812 where the neckwear of a parliamentarian shall not exceed the width of a gentleman's stride. How wide is a gentleman's stride, you ask? They didn't know either. That sparked a spontaneous demonstration involving 6 men pacing across the chamber like confused flamingos, trying to find an average. One slipped. There was laughter. A page boy dropped a tray of ink pots. Still, the debate trudged forward. Someone, suggested issuing official parliamentary scarves. Navy blue, modest length, embroidered with the royal crest. Standardized scarves, they argued, would preserve decorum and make it easier to tell who belonged in the chamber versus who was delivering the meat pies. Then there was the concern of weaponization. You're not kidding. An MP actually stood and declared, a scarf that long could, in theory, be twirled at high speed and used to incapacitate another member. He demonstrated with his own scarf, spinning it like a ribbon dancer having a tantrum. The speaker had to interrupt. Sir Reginald, please refrain from simulating violence with your accessories. Even Queen Victoria's portrait seemed to scowl from the wall. Or maybe that was just the candlelight. At one point, a pamphlet was circulated, anonymously of course, entitled Scarves and the Decline of British Backbone. It was filled with dire warnings that soft neckwear led to soft policies. There were caricatures. Lord Bartholomew's was particularly brutal, his head replaced by a ball of yarn, his hands full of knitting needles. In retaliation, his supporters printed their own, cold necks, cold hearts. You find one wedged under a chair. The subtitle reads, Why Warmth Equals Wisdom. There's even a crude drawing of Aristotle in a scarf, looking smugly intellectual. It wasn't just about scarves anymore. It became about class, tradition, the old versus the new. Bartholomew represented a newer generation of thinkers, less stiff, more open to flair. His opponents clung to the belief that the scarf was merely a gateway to chaos. If they let this one thing slide, next someone would arrive wearing boots made of otter or, heaven forbid, a tie and paisley. Historians still debate whether this scarf incident truly lasted 3 weeks, or whether the records were padded by bored clerks who enjoyed the theater of it all. Some even believe Lord Bartholomew started the whole thing on purpose to delay a vote on coal tariffs he didn't like. Whether by accident or design, it worked. No progress was made on actual policy for nearly a month. The final decision? Yes, the conclusion was peak Parliament. They created a formal rule stating that scarves were permitted so long as they did not obscure the cravat, did not exceed 1 3/4 turns around the neck, and were not flamboyant to the point of distraction. And that, my friend, is how the phrase flamboyant to the point of distraction entered the official records of one of the most powerful governments on earth. You hear a chair creak behind you. Someone has nodded off, face tilted toward the ceiling, not snoring exactly but gently wheezing in a rhythm that almost sounds like applause. You smile. You could fall asleep to that. Because here's the thing. While wars raged and revolutions brewed, somewhere in the heart of empire, grown men argued passionately about fabric, tassels, and the fragility of cravats. And honestly, thank goodness, they did. These are the stories that remind you history wasn't all grand and grim. Sometimes it was just silly, soft, human, like a scarf on a cold morning, or a whisper of laughter drifting through the chambers of power. And just when you thought scarves were the peak of parliamentary silliness, you find yourself strolling quietly into a French courtroom in the year 1649. Not just any courtroom, but the Parlement de Paris, where powdered wigs bounce with every outraged nod, and the scent of old ink, beeswax, and barely concealed ego fills the air like a forgotten perfume. You settle into a wooden bench that feels like it was carved for someone significantly narrower. There's a scuffle near the front, papers flying. A clerk drops a quill, and then it begins. Tonight's central topic: whether monks should be taxed based on the number of eggs they eat during Lent. You blink. Surely this is some mistake. But no, the scrolls are unfurled, the chamber is packed, and one man is already shouting the word omelette like it's a legal term. Let's set the scene. France, mid-17th century, is trying desperately to modernize its tax system, which at that time resembled something between a treasure hunt and an existential riddle. The church, of course, was largely tax-exempt, but certain bureaucrats had begun to whisper, what about food? What about indulgence? And what's more indulgent than eggs during Lent? One side, the egg loyalists, if you will, argued that monks were exploiting loopholes. They weren't technically eating meat, sure, but the volume of eggs consumed in some abbeys could allegedly rival that of a mid-sized chicken festival. A letter read aloud from one inspector said, "In the Abbey of St. Lo, I counted no fewer than 183 boiled eggs consumed between sundown and midnight. I cannot say what spiritual clarity was achieved, but the cholesterol was certainly abundant." Laughter rippled through the room. Though, of course, they didn't know what cholesterol was yet. Just that too many eggs made one's complexion humid and unfortunate. The defense was swift and dramatic. Father Henri de Toulouse stood with arms wide. "Eggs," he declared, "are the gift of a silent animal. They are not meat. They do not scream. They do not bleed. How can one tax silence?" Now that's a rhetorical question for the ages. A magistrate leaned over his bench and whispered, "What about poached eggs?" As if wondering whether stealthy cooking methods might alter the ethics. Suddenly, a heated sub-debate broke out over egg preparation. A younger, rather ambitious tax official insisted that scrambled eggs were unnaturally luxurious, bordering on decadent, and therefore ought to incur higher tax than plain boiled ones. The opposition countered that decadence is not a measurable metric and that taxing flavor was a step toward moral tyranny. Someone proposed a spiritual austerity scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being soufflé. At this point, you've completely forgotten your surroundings and are mentally rating egg dishes. But the absurdity didn't end there. A whisper of scandal swept the chamber when one monk was accused of hiding yolks in his robes to eat later. He was known as Brother Lucien, the Concealer. Rumors abounded. He had created a secret stash of custard beneath the chapel. His fellow monks called it the sweet chapel sin. The prosecutor held up an egg and asked, "Is this the fruit of labor or the fruit of loophole?" You feel the tension ripple. This could go anywhere. A scholarly-looking man from the Sorbonne presented a chart, yes, an actual chart, detailing how egg consumption rose in monasteries during Lent by up to 400%. He called it the yolk curve. The chart was shaped like a mountain, or possibly an omelet. He went on to argue that taxation wasn't about punishment but about parity. "Why should the butcher pay when the monk feasts in silence?" he said, with a tone that implied he hadn't had breakfast. The church's rebuttal, of course, was eloquent and utterly confusing. They cited ancient texts and theological loopholes. One cardinal held up a medieval manuscript and declared, "It is written that eggs are like angels, pure within and uncorrupted by the sins of the flesh." That one got applause. Someone in the gallery stood up and shouted, "What about duck eggs?" and was swiftly escorted out. His hat remained on. The bench like a symbol of resistance. You shift slightly in your seat. A pigeon coos softly from a windowsill. Somewhere nearby, someone snores, a slow, gentle rhythm like a soft drum. Probably a bishop. And still, the debate rages. Now they're discussing the sound eggs make. Yes, the sound, because one noble claimed that cracking an egg during Lent echoed like temptation itself. A poet by trade, apparently. He suggested banning loud cracking or requiring monks to muffle their shells. That proposal was met with stunned silence, followed by uproarious debate over whether boiling could be taxed differently from cracking. By now, you're not sure if this is a courtroom or a cooking show. And then, in a moment of sheer parliamentary brilliance or perhaps delirium, a judge solemnly states, "We cannot allow yolks to become currency in cloisters." The quote is repeated. A clerk scribbles it furiously. You smile. You know that line's going to live forever in the footnotes of some textbook nobody reads. Eventually, after hours of deliberation, half of which revolved around medieval recipes, and whether soufflés could be made with divine intent, a ruling is handed down. Eggs may be consumed by monks during Lent, tax-free, provided they are not combined with sugar or butter. Any custard, flan, or pudding discovered will result in immediate ecclesiastical review. The courtroom exhaled. The matter was closed. For now. You lean back, the bench still unforgiving, but your mind drifting. Because what you just witnessed wasn't just a silly debate. It was something delightfully human. When faced with a vast unknowable world, people, especially powerful ones, will always find time to argue about the little things, like neckwear or breakfast. And historians still argue, By the way, whether that ruling led to a rise in egg smuggling between abbeys. One account claims a monk tried to ferment eggs into wine. That was later debunked, but the rumor lives on in the margins of old letters. So yes, somewhere in the dusty archives of French law lies a page about the moral implications of eating. Too many omelets, and you, lucky you, were there to hear it. Now rest your eyes a moment, let the soft murmurs fade, because the next debate, it might involve soup spoons, and trust me, you'll want to be well rested for that one. You're settling back into the slow rhythm of your journey through history's most delightfully absurd parliamentary moments, and this time, your steps take you all the way to England, early 18th century, to a time when powdered wigs were so elaborate they practically had their own postal codes, and men debated with such gravity that even a sneeze was treated like a major security breach. You find yourself in the grand hall of the House of Commons, where the latest topic causing quite the stir is, drum roll please, the appropriate length of a politician's speech. Now, you might think that debates about speech length belong more in the modern era of Twitter and TikTok, where brevity reigns supreme. But no, your predecessors in powdered wigs had their own version of too long didn't listen, only with more lace and less Wi-Fi. It begins with a gentleman named Sir Reginald Featherstonehaugh, yes, really, and his fiery complaint about a certain member's habit of speaking so long that even the chamber's bats took flight in protest. Featherstonehaugh claimed that such lengthy speeches were causing irreparable damage to the posteriors of fellow parliamentarians, many of whom were resorting to standing rather than sitting for fear of permanent indentations. You can almost hear the collective groan as Sir Reginald launches into his tirade about endurance and respect for one's fellow lawmaker. The chamber falls silent, except for the occasional cough that sounds suspiciously like a suppressed yawn. A proposal emerges to limit speeches to no longer than 20 minutes, or roughly the time it takes to sip a cup of rather mediocre tea twice over. Naturally, this sparks immediate outrage from several members who pride themselves on their oratory prowess. One flamboyant member, Lord Percival Blatherskite, stands and declares, "A speech is like a symphony. You cannot rush a symphony any more than you can rush the growth of a fine beard." His wig flutters dramatically as he speaks, eliciting scattered chuckles. The debate quickly spirals into a rather passionate discussion on the art of the speech. What makes a speech memorable? Is it the length, the style, the volume of hand-waving, or the sheer endurance of the audience? You lean in as a scholarly fellow rises to suggest that speeches should be measured not by time, but by the number of jokes included. If you can't make your point and make us laugh, he said, you might as well be reading from a grocery list. This was met with mixed reactions, some appreciative, some confused, and one elderly member who simply muttered, "I don't do jokes." Amid this back and forth, you catch whispers of an earlier, less-known tradition, the snoring vote. Yes, apparently in some parliaments, members would vote on the quality of speeches by how loudly the audience snored or sighed in boredom. It was said that a particularly dull speech could cause a chain reaction of snoring that lasted for minutes. You almost chuckled to yourself, imagining these gentlemen in their ornate chairs, fighting over policies one moment and struggling to keep their eyelids open the next. The snoring vote, while unofficial, was a potent tool, sometimes more effective than any formal objection. But back to the present debate. As the arguments continue, a rather unexpected concern emerges: the health implications of long speeches. Some members, worried about circulation and the risk of fainting, or worse, spontaneous wig combustion, urge for breaks and water. One witty member suggested that speeches should be split into chapters, allowing listeners to take breaks, and even grab a bite. He imagined parliamentary snacks, tiny meat pies and scones, served with a side of sarcasm. "If we must endure long speeches," he said, "let us at least be fed like kings, or at least like slightly hungry nobles." The chamber erupts in laughter, lightening the mood considerably. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a peculiar subplot unfolds involving a secretary who tried to secretly time speeches with a pocket watch. This gentleman, however, was caught snoozing during a particularly tedious address and had to be rescued from a fit of embarrassed coughing. Historians still debate whether this incident influenced the eventual rules on speech length or just added fuel to the fire of parliamentary gossip. Eventually, After hours of spirited discussion, the House agrees on a compromise. Speeches should be limited to 30 minutes during regular sessions, but could be extended for exceptional occasions, such as impassioned pleas or explanations involving particularly complicated recipes. You can almost hear the cooks behind the scenes breathe a sigh of relief. The motion passes, but not without some theatrics. Lord Blatherskite attempts to deliver a 15-minute limerick to celebrate the decision, but is cut off by the Speaker, who taps his gavel like a tired parent telling a child to stop before someone gets hurt. As the chamber settles down, you take a moment to reflect. The issue of speech length, so seemingly mundane, reveals much about the culture of politics then, and, even now, it shows us that no matter the era, humans struggle with patience, endurance, and the art of saying what matters without saying too much. And you realize something else. Perhaps the real debate isn't about the length of speeches, but about the shared experience of sitting together, sometimes bored, sometimes inspired, but always present. There's a strangely comforting rhythm to it, like a bedtime story you've heard before, yet somehow still want to hear again. Historians still argue, of course, about whether the 30-minute rule led to more concise legislation or simply to more cleverly drawn-out speeches. Some claim it sparked a golden age of rhetoric. Others say it just made the snoring more synchronized. As you quietly rise from your seat, a faint snore echoes from the back of the hall, a gentle reminder that even in the grandest chambers, humans remain wonderfully imperfect creatures. Now take a deep breath. Let the echoes of powdered wigs and witty speeches drift away like the last tendrils of a fading dream. Soon the next chapter will call, with its own brand of parliamentary peculiarities. But for now, just rest here with me a little longer. The night is calm, the world is still, and the stories, well, they're only just beginning. You follow the gentle hum of history as it drifts down a dusty corridor and find yourself wandering into a dimly lit chamber somewhere deep within the Scottish Parliament in the late 1600s. The stone walls seem to absorb every word uttered within, while the flicker of candlelight casts long, mysterious shadows on faces of men draped in heavy cloaks. This time, the debate at hand might strike you as bizarrely relatable, the proper way to address a hearty toast at official gatherings. You might think, a toast? Surely that's just a quick clink of glasses and a cheerful cheers. But no, dear listener. In these hallowed halls, toasting was practically an art form and a battlefield, because here, even the word cheers could spark a 3-hour argument, and the question of how hearty a toast should be delivered was taken as seriously as any law about taxes or borders. The problem started when a certain Lord McTavish insisted that all official toasts be robust and vigorous as befits men of honor, while others argued that such hearty expressions risked causing damage to delicate glassware and, more worryingly, to the dignity of sober participants. You watch as Lord McTavish stands tall, his voice booming through the chamber. A toast is the heartbeat of any gathering. It must be shouted loud enough to wake the Highlands from their slumber. His eyes gleam with passion, his hand raised high with a goblet of some mysterious amber liquid. Opposing him, Lady Fiona Campbell, known for her sharp wit and cooler head, counters calmly. A toast should be measured, warm enough to stir spirits, but tempered enough not to cause a cascade of spilled drinks or bruised egos. Now you're probably imagining this is all about etiquette, but it's really about control. Who gets to lead, who gets heard, and who can claim the spotlight at the moment the glasses meet. And oh, the glasses did meet, sometimes with such force that the chamber echoed with ringing sounds more fitting of a battlefield than a banquet. At one point, the debate turns to a peculiar issue, the precise angle at which a goblet should be raised. One earnest member, a man named Angus MacLeod, had proposed a strict protocol. No glass shall be tilted beyond 45 degrees, to prevent the inevitable spillage and resulting arguments. Others dismissed this as tyranny, asserting that toasts were an expression of individual spirit and should not be constrained by mathematical measurements. You can almost picture the scene. Angus, measuring angles with a protractor, Lady Campbell rolling her eyes behind her fan, and somewhere in the back, a member who had clearly lost interest starts doodling caricatures of everyone involved. Among the more entertaining moments, a younger noble suggested that toasts be accompanied by a victory dance, which he claimed would enhance the emotional impact. This idea was met with such uproarious laughter that even the staunchest opponents struggled to keep straight faces. You imagine that would have been quite the sight, a room full of stone-faced politicians attempting coordinated jigs. A curious side note that historians still debate today involves the tradition of the silent toast. Legend has it that some members would raise their glasses without uttering a word, allowing silence to do the heavy lifting. Was this a sign of respect, a subtle form of protest, or simply a way to avoid offending anyone? The answer remains lost in the mists of time, though some scholars argue it was an early form of political sarcasm, much like modern eye rolls. As the debate wears on, attention turns to the drink itself. What should fill the goblets? Ale, whiskey, something stronger perhaps? You hear murmurs about a rogue distiller who once introduced a fiery concoction so potent that it was rumored to cause a parliamentarian to propose marriage and then promptly forget it. The fiery liquor, nicknamed Dragon's Breath, was eventually banned, but not before inspiring countless tales of parliamentary mischief and awkward declarations of affection. The chamber now buzzes with stories, some serious, others absurd, about toasts gone wrong, glasses shattered, and friendships forged over spilled drinks. You begin to see that this was never just about the mechanics of a toast, but about the messy, human side of governance. How people, even in the gravest settings, find ways to celebrate, clash, and connect. The final resolution, much to everyone's surprise, is a set of guidelines that feel more like poetry than law. Toasts should be warm, but measured. Glasses raised at a respectful, but not robotic angle. No forced victory dances, though spontaneous ones are encouraged. And above all, a toast is a moment to honor the collective spirit, however clumsily expressed. You smile softly, imagining these lawmakers clinking glasses in a chorus of imperfect harmony. Somewhere in a quiet corner, a weary clerk makes a note. The art of the toast, no matter how silly, is the glue that holds us together. You take a slow breath and lean back. The candlelight flickers as the debate fades, replaced by the gentle whisper of camaraderie. Historians still puzzle over how much these toasting rules influence later parliamentary traditions. Some say they gave rise to modern-day cheers and handshakes, while others insist they were simply a delicious distraction from more serious matters. As you prepare to leave this warm chamber, you carry with you a simple truth. Even the smallest rituals like a toast are woven into the fabric of history. They remind us that beneath the robes and rhetoric we are all just people seeking connection. Now let your thoughts settle like the last drop of whiskey in a glass. The room dims, the night quiets, and the stories, they'll be waiting, ready to unfold when you're next ready to listen. Sleep well. You find yourself strolling through yet another dimly lit parliament chamber, this time crossing the channel to the French Estates General of the late 1700s. The air is thick with tension, powdered wigs, and the faint scent of spilled wine from a previous overly enthusiastic session. Here your footsteps lead you into a debate so peculiar it's almost hard to believe it ever consumed so much attention. The topic? Which type of hat is most appropriate for members to wear during sessions, and whether hats should be removed or kept on at all times. Yes, hats. You might think this sounds trivial, perhaps a little silly, but you'd be wrong. The hat wars, as some contemporaries mockingly called them, weren't just about fashion. They were about respect, status, and the subtle signaling that clothing provided in the intricate dance of power. The trouble started when a faction of younger deputies eager to distance themselves from the old aristocracy's traditions decided that the cumbersome, oversized tricorn hats worn by many were outdated and impractical. They proposed a more modest and functional cap, something lighter, less ostentatious, and less likely to cause accidental pokes in the eye. Of course, this proposal was met with thunderous opposition from older members who saw their hats as symbols of their authority and lineage. Monsieur Leblanc, a senior deputy with a particularly magnificent feathered tricorn, stood to proclaim, "To remove my hat is to strip away my honor, my dignity, and perhaps even my very identity." The debate quickly grew heated, with members passionately defending their preferred styles, tricorns, bicorns, simple caps, and even the occasional flamboyant feather or ribbon. You can almost hear the swish of silk ribbons, the rustle of feathers, and the occasional sharp intake of breath as someone's hat nearly collides with a lamp. At one point, a witty young noble quipped that the chamber was less a place of governance and more a millinery convention gone rogue. This comment drew a mix of laughter and scandalized gasps, the kind you'd expect when sarcasm flies like a well-aimed dart. An odd complication soon arose, the etiquette surrounding when to remove or keep one's hat. Some argued it was a sign of respect to remove hats when the king or speaker entered, while others believed hats should remain on to assert independence and remind everyone who was really in charge. This debate went on for hours, with motions proposed and withdrawn, and members attempting to demonstrate proper hat removal techniques, some overly ceremonious, others so casual they looked like they were brushing dust off a shelf. You find yourself imagining this chaotic scene. Hats tipping, feathers fluttering, powdered wigs trying desperately not to be overshadowed. Somewhere, a hat flew off completely, narrowly missing the speaker's head and eliciting a collective gasp that could have rivaled a thunderclap. Amid this absurdity, a little-known fact surfaces. There was actually a practice called the hat token. A small medallion or token was attached to hats of deputies to signify their rank or allegiance, almost like a secret handshake, but dangling from their headgear. This hat token tradition, rarely mentioned in textbooks, sometimes led to covert exchanges and sly signaling that could sway votes or form alliances without a single word spoken. Imagine that, a political power game played out through the decoration on a hat. The very existence of these tokens caused great confusion among new members, many of whom found themselves unwittingly allied or opposed just by the ornamentation on their headwear. It was like fashion espionage in miniature, a silent battlefield, perched atop powdered curls. You watch as the debate drifts to the practical consequences of hats. The chamber was known for its high ceilings and strong drafts, and hats sometimes flew off unexpectedly during gusts, sometimes landing in punch bowls or on the heads of unsuspecting clerks. One particularly memorable story involves a hat that flew off, took out a chandelier candle, and almost started a fire. Historians still argue whether this was an accident or a subtle act of rebellion. Eventually, after much haggling, a compromise emerges. Members would be required to remove hats when the king or speaker entered, but could otherwise wear them as they pleased. The hat token tradition would be officially recognized but carefully regulated to prevent confusion. The session closes with an air of relief, some hats perched a little higher, others slightly more modest, but all part of the grand spectacle. That is political theater. You pause and realize this hat debate reveals something deeper about human nature, our need to express identity and authority, even when wrapped in seemingly frivolous customs. It's a reminder that power is often as much about symbols and appearance as it is about laws and policies. And of course, as always, the historians are divided. Some see this episode as a charming example of political theater and tradition. Others argue it distracted from more pressing issues, or worse, that it reflected a stubborn refusal to adapt to changing times. As you step away from this hat-filled chamber, the image of swirling feathers and bouncing tricorn hats lingers, mingling with the distant echoes of laughter and heated debate. The night grows quieter now, and as you slowly drift away, the gentle rustling of fabric and the soft tap of a well-polished shoe fade into a soft, rhythmic pulse, the heartbeat of history's lighter moments. Let your thoughts soften like the folds of a well-worn hat and drift peacefully into the next story waiting just beyond the veil of sleep. You glide through the corridors of history and find yourself back in the British Parliament during the early 1800s, a time when political debates were thick with smoke, sharp tongues, and, believe it or not, an ongoing argument about the correct pronunciation of the word schedule. Yes, you heard that right. Something as seemingly innocent as pronouncing a word sparked a surprisingly persistent and silly dispute. Now, you might think this would be a quick matter of linguistic preference, but no. This debate had the weight of identity, class, and regional pride attached to it. Picture the scene. Grand wooden benches, brass fixtures catching the late afternoon sun, and gentlemen in powdered wigs, or their slightly more modern counterparts, clutching dictionaries as if they were swords. The crux of the matter? Whether schedule should be pronounced with a soft sh sound, like schedule, favored by the English upper class, or with a hard sk sound, like schedule, which was common in Scotland and other parts of Britain. Both camps argued passionately, each convinced their pronunciation was not just correct, but a reflection of refined culture. You might hear Lord Pembroke declare, with the utmost seriousness, to say schedule is to barbarize the Queen's English. It is a crime against the very fabric of our language. To which a spirited Scottish representative might retort, and to say schedule is to deny the rich, rugged heritage of the Highlands. This disagreement led to endless verbal sparring. Members would interrupt each other mid-sentence to correct pronunciations, turning what should have been straightforward policy discussions into a phonetic battlefield. It wasn't just about sound, it was about identity and belonging. Language has always been a powerful marker of who belongs and who doesn't, and in a chamber filled with clashing cultures and backgrounds, the pronunciation of schedule was a proxy for deeper tensions. But here's where it gets even more amusing. Some members, fed up with the endless arguments, proposed a compromise. They suggested alternating pronunciations depending on the day of the week. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays would be schedule days. Tuesdays and Thursdays, schedule days. The idea was quickly shot down as impractical, but the fact it was proposed at all shows just how much energy was spent on this linguistic tug-of-war. You might wonder, did this debate ever resolve? Historians still argue about how much the Parliament's squabbles influenced modern British English. Some say the split in pronunciation persists to this day because of these historical rifts, while others believe everyday usage simply evolved, independently. Adding a quirky footnote to this debate, there's the story of a young clerk who, tired of the constant back and forth, began a tally of every time the word schedule was mispronounced or corrected during sessions. His ledger, now lost but referenced in anecdotes, allegedly showed over 100 such interruptions in a single day. Proof that even in the grand halls of government, small things can derail the mightiest discussions, and it wasn't just pronunciation that caused headaches. There were also arguments over the word's meaning and spelling. A few eccentric members insisted schedule should be spelled schedule to reflect its true pronunciation, while others clung to the classical Latin roots, fearing that changing the spelling would undermine the language itself. As the debate dragged on, the atmosphere often shifted from serious to downright ridiculous. At one memorable session, a gentleman accidentally pronounced it skeleton during a particularly heated speech, prompting a chorus of laughter that lightened the mood for several minutes, a rare reprieve in the otherwise tense chamber. This incident, historians speculate, was one of the few moments when members genuinely connected over a shared human flaw, the tendency to slip up under pressure. So, what does this tell you? Beyond the humor and head-shaking, it shows how language isn't just a tool for communication, but a symbol of culture, power, and identity. Even the smallest sounds can carry immense weight in the dance of politics. You lean back and imagine these spirited individuals, their voices echoing through marble halls, battling not just over policies, but over pronunciation, finding themselves caught between tradition and change. And of course, as with many of these parliamentary stories, there's a lesson buried beneath the silliness. Sometimes, what seems trivial on the surface reveals deeper human needs, of belonging, respect, and the fear of losing one's place in a rapidly changing world. As the echoes of this linguistic duel fade, you feel a calmness settle over the chamber. The debate over schedule is now a gentle hum in the background, a reminder that words, like people, can be stubborn, unpredictable, and endlessly fascinating. Let your mind drift now as the sounds soften, the voices slow, and you slip gently into the quiet rhythm of the night, carried on by the whispers of history's most charming and quirky debates. You wander through the grand echoing halls of the British House of Commons in the early 20th century, a place where the scent of polished wood mingles with the faint smoke of cigars and the low murmur of expectant voices. Tonight, your footsteps lead you into a debate that might seem odd to the modern ear, but was fiercely contested in its day. The proper way to address fellow members, should it be the honorable gentleman, the learned lady, Or something far more creative? It's a discussion that sounds polite, even quaint, but underneath the surface it's a battleground for respect, tradition, and a touch of political theater. Imagine the chamber alive with members standing, adjusting their waistcoats, and delivering pointed remarks, all while carefully navigating the etiquette of address. You're invited to listen closely, because this debate about language is about far more than mere words. It's about power, recognition, and the subtle art of making a point without outright offense. You can almost hear Mr. Wilkins, a senior MP known for his booming voice and meticulous manners, rising to his feet to declare, "We must maintain decorum." The title, Honorable Gentleman, is not just a phrase. It's a symbol of our shared respect and unity in this house. He adjusts his spectacles for emphasis. Abandoning this tradition is to invite chaos, and worse, confusion. But across the aisle, Miss Clare, a rising star known for her sharp wit and even sharper tongue, retorts, "Mr. Wilkins, with all due respect, times are changing. Our language must evolve with them. Why should we be bound to these archaic forms that serve only to mask genuine disagreement behind a veil of politeness?" This sparks a flurry of interjections and murmurs, some supportive, others scandalized. You imagine the tension rising, not with raised voices, but with carefully worded jabs, the kind that might sting longer than a shouted insult. The heart of the matter is that members wanted to find ways to express disagreement and critique without descending into personal attacks, an artful balance between civility and political sparring. But of course, each suggestion on how to address colleagues was loaded with meaning, capable of softening or sharpening the blow of debate. There's an anecdote from the archives about a particularly spirited MP who, fed up with the endless honorable gentlemen and learned ladies, began using increasingly creative and indirect titles. At one point, he referred to a rival as the gentleman of considerable verbosity and minimal substance. The chamber erupted with laughter, and the speaker had to call for order, reminding everyone to keep it civil. Interestingly, this episode led to an unofficial competition among members to craft the most artful, humorous, yet polite insults wrapped in formal address. It was like an early version of roast battles, just with more tweed and fewer microphones. You might be surprised to learn that some of these clever turns of phrase actually became part of political folklore. For example, the honorable gentleman with the silver tongue but leaden ideas was a favorite jab, both biting and oddly poetic. While these verbal duels were entertaining, historians still debate their impact. Some argue they preserved a level of decorum that prevented debates from becoming outright hostile. Others suggest they masked genuine frustration and animosity, creating a facade of civility that made actual progress more difficult. As you let these stories swirl in your mind, you notice how the debate about address parallels modern discussions about political correctness and respect in public discourse. The struggle to balance honesty, respect, and effectiveness in communication seems as old as politics itself. And the fun doesn't end there. There was a brief, forgotten moment when a proposal was floated to replace all formal titles with animal nicknames to lighten the mood. Imagine members addressing each other as Honorable Fox or Gentle Owl. While quickly dismissed, the mere suggestion caused a ripple of laughter, showing that even the most serious institutions occasionally yearn for a bit of whimsy. You realize these debates about language and etiquette weren't just fluff. They reveal a human desire for connection and understanding, even amid fierce political battles. They remind you that behind every sharp retort or carefully crafted phrase is a person trying to be heard, respected, and sometimes even liked. As you step back from this lively chamber, the echoes of honorable gentlemen and learned ladies fade into a gentle murmur, like the distant hum of a familiar lullaby. The sharp edges soften, the words grow quieter, and you find yourself wrapped in the comforting cloak of history's ongoing conversation about how we talk to each other. Let your thoughts drift now, carried on soft whispers and careful phrases, as the chamber's bustle fades and you slip gently toward rest, cradled by the enduring rhythm of human dialogue. You step quietly back into the chambers of history, this time to witness one of the most delightfully absurd spectacles of parliamentary life, the notorious incident of the Great Whig debate in the late 18th century. Imagine yourself amidst the swirl of powdered hair, the scent of pomade thick in the air, and the rustle of silk breeches as members argued not over laws, but over whether wearing wigs in Parliament was a necessary tradition or a ridiculous anachronism. Wigs, as you might know, were the hallmark of status and decorum in many European courts for centuries. By the 1700s, British Parliament was no exception. But like all traditions, they became ripe for mockery and resistance. Some members saw the wig as a symbol of dignity, a visual cue of authority and seriousness. Others thought they looked like oversized, itchy, and outdated helmets, perfectly suited for satire. The debate began innocuously enough, with a few members questioning the practicality of wigs during long sessions. After all, it was a hot summer, and the heavy powder and curls made some politicians sweat like prize bulls in a ring. But soon the conversation escalated into a full-blown quarrel about fashion, identity, and the very image of Parliament. You can almost hear Mr. Somerset, a fervent traditionalist, bellowing, "To cast aside the wig is to cast aside the honor of this institution. The powdered crown is the sign of our noble office." Meanwhile, Mr. Harris, ever the progressive, shot back, "Nonsense. We are not court jesters trapped in an 18th century fashion show. Let us unburden ourselves of these ridiculous coiffures and focus on governance." What followed was a back and forth so fierce that the speaker had to intervene multiple times, urging calm while members jabbed at each other's hairstyles and personal hygiene. There were even whispers of wagers made on who could last longest without scratching their heads in frustration. Here's where it gets even more entertaining. A well-known story from the time tells of an elderly MP who, fed up with the wigs, showed up one day with his hair natural, proudly bareheaded. The chamber gasped, some gasped in horror, others tried not to laugh. The man reportedly declared, "I shall be the pioneer of reason and relief from this powdered prison." His bold move sparked a wave of support among younger MPs and became a symbol of modernity versus tradition. Yet, as with many parliamentary reforms, change was slow. Some members clung to their wigs as if to old friends, while others secretly cheered for the new breeze of freedom brushing through the halls. Historians still debate the lasting impact of the Great Wig Debate. Some argue it was a turning point in parliamentary culture, marking a shift toward less rigid formalities and a more approachable government. Others see it as merely a humorous footnote, a distraction from the real issues being discussed. Beyond the wigs themselves, the debate also highlighted a deeper theme: the tension between appearance and substance in politics. When does tradition help maintain order, and when does it become a barrier to progress? It's a question that echoes through centuries, still relevant today. And, as always, there was a fair share of satire. Pamphlets circulated mocking the wigs, caricatures depicted MPs as walking powdered poodles, and street vendors sold de-wigging, ituikau. The public found much amusement in the whole affair, reminding everyone that even the highest powers are not immune to humor. You might smile to know that the wig debate also inspired a brief but lively trend in parliamentary attire. Some members experimented with colorful ribbons and exaggerated curls, turning the chamber into a bit of a fashion show. Others went the opposite direction, shaving their heads completely in protest. Through it all, the wigs remained a symbol, not just of status, but of the constant struggle between clinging to the past and embracing the future. The sight of powdered white curls bobbing and swaying during debates stands as a charming reminder that even serious institutions have their moments of whimsy. As you ease away from this ornate spectacle, the echoes of powdered hair and polite insults soften like a fading melody. The wig debate may be over, but its legacy lingers as a gentle lesson. Sometimes the most profound changes start with a simple question about why we do things the way we do. So, as your eyelids grow heavier and the night wraps around you like a soft cloak, carry this tale with you. The story of wigs, rebellion, and the subtle power of shedding old skins to make way for new ideas. And now, with that gentle thought nestled in your mind, drift softly toward rest. The whisper of history, cradling you closer to peaceful dreams. As the night deepens, you find yourself drawn once more into the hallowed halls of parliamentary history, this time to witness the final act of our journey through those silly debates and sleepy moments. You settle in to hear about the legendary "Who Snored the Loudest" incident, a tale that perfectly captures the human side of politics, the yawns, the nods, and yes, the audible snores that echoed through the chamber, reminding everyone that even the fiercest lawmakers have their limits. Picture this. It's the mid-19th century, a time when Parliament sat for marathon sessions, sometimes stretching well past midnight. The debates were dense, the speeches long, and the air thick with the smell of candle wax and tobacco. Members sat in heavy wooden benches, many trying their best to stay alert amid the droning oratory. But nature calls, as it does, in the form of sleep. And not just any sleep. Deep, loud, unmistakable snores that rumbled like distant thunder through the quiet parts of the chamber. The story goes that one particular evening, during a debate on the minutiae of railway regulations, not exactly the most riveting subject, several MPs succumbed to slumber. Among them was the notoriously gruff Sir Benjamin, whose snores became the stuff of legend. As his snores grew louder and more rhythmic, some members began to count, joking quietly about the number of snores per minute. Others tried to suppress their laughter, while a few, out of sheer exhaustion, almost joined in. Now you might expect that the speaker would put an immediate stop to such a breach of decorum, but interestingly, the reactions were mixed. Some found it endearing, a reminder that these men were human after all, not just polished orators and stern politicians. Others viewed it as a scandal, a sign that the institution was losing its seriousness. What makes this tale even more charming is how it spread outside Parliament. Satirical newspapers of the day had a field day, publishing cartoons of sleeping MPs with zizzes rising over their heads and captions like, "The hottest new policy, parliamentary naps." The public, always hungry for a little humor in politics, lapped it up. Historians still debate whether this incident led to any reforms in parliamentary scheduling or rules on decorum. Some say it contributed to the gradual shortening of sessions and introduction of tea breaks. Others suggest it was just another quirky episode in a long list of parliamentary antics. But what truly stands out is the lesson tucked away in these snoring escapades. Politics isn't just about speeches, laws, and grand ideas. It's also about the people, their fatigue, their quirks, and their very human need to rest, even amid great responsibility. As you imagine the room filled with gentle snores, the occasional shuffle of papers, and whispered jokes, you feel a connection to those long-gone lawmakers. They remind you that beneath the layers of tradition and ceremony, politics has always been, at its heart, a very human affair. Now, as our story winds down, I want to take a moment to thank you for wandering through this quirky journey with me. If you've enjoyed stepping back in time, listening to these playful, sometimes absurd debates, I'd love for you to hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next adventure into history's lesser-known corners. Feel free to share your favorite silly debate or your own experiences with long meetings in the comments. I'm curious, when was the last time you almost nodded off in a meeting or a class? And where in the world are you joining me from tonight? Drop your location and local time below. I love seeing our community come together from all corners. Before you drift off, remember? History isn't just dates and battles. It's the stories of real people who laughed, argued, and yes, even snored their way through some of the most important moments. So, dim those lights, settle into your coziest spot, and let the soft hum of the night cradle you. Thank you for sharing this time with me, and until next time, sweet dreams and gentle rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.